There is a specific kind of frustration that feels almost impossible to explain. You're angry. You know you're angry. Your thoughts are sharp. Your boundaries feel crossed. Your body is tense. And yet, instead of expressing that anger clearly, your throat tightens, your eyes burn, and tears appear. In that moment, the anger seems to collapse into something else, something softer on the surface, but far more overwhelming inside. And almost immediately, another emotion joins in. Shame. You tell yourself you look weak, you feel misunderstood, you feel like your anger has been invalidated by your own body. This experience is far more common than people admit, and it has very little to do with weakness or immaturity. It has everything to do with how your nervous system handles emotional overload. Most people grow up with a very narrow definition of anger. Anger is supposed to look loud, direct, maybe even aggressive, raised voices, firm words, clear confrontation. Crying doesn't fit that image, so when it happens, the mind assumes something has gone wrong. But biologically, anger is not a single emotion. It's a high arousal state, and high arousal states need an outlet. When the system can't express anger outwardly in a way that feels safe, controlled, or acceptable, the energy has to go somewhere else. Tears are not the opposite of anger. They are one of the body's pressure release mechanisms. From a neurological perspective, crying during anger often happens when multiple systems activate at once. Anger triggers the sympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for fight or flight. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your thoughts speed up. At the same time, another part of the brain is monitoring social consequences. Am I allowed to be angry here? Will this damage the relationship? Will I be judged, rejected, or misunderstood if I express this fully? When those two signals collide, activation without permission, the system becomes overloaded. Crying is the release valve. This is why it often happens in situations where you feel unheard, dismissed, or powerless. You're angry because a boundary was crossed, but you don't feel safe asserting that boundary clearly. Maybe you were taught that anger is dangerous, rude, or unacceptable. Maybe you learned early on that expressing anger led to conflict you couldn't handle. Over time, your nervous system adapted. It learned to redirect anger inward or downward rather than outward. Tears become the expression of anger that doesn't feel socially threatening. There's also an important emotional layering that happens. Anger is rarely a primary emotion. Underneath it, there's often hurt, disappointment, fear, or grief. When someone ignores you, invalidates you, or treats you unfairly, the anger you feel is often protecting something more vulnerable underneath. Crying occurs when that vulnerable layer breaks through, not because the anger disappears, but because the deeper emotion finally finds space. This is why people often say, "I don't know why I'm crying, I'm just angry." In reality, your body knows exactly why. Another factor is emotional processing speed. Some people experience emotions very quickly and intensely. Their internal response outpaces their ability to verbalize it. When anger arrives faster than language, the body speaks instead. Tears, shaking, tightness in the chest. These are forms of communication that don't require words. They happen when the emotional signal is stronger than the cognitive system's ability to organize and express it in real time. Crying during anger is also strongly linked to suppression. If you habitually suppress anger, consciously or unconsciously, it doesn't disappear. Suppressed emotion stays active in the nervous system. It builds pressure. Then when a situation finally pushes you past a threshold, the release is disproportionate. You may cry over something that seems small, but it's rarely just about that moment. It's about all the anger that wasn't allowed expression before it. Social conditioning plays a major role here as well. Many people, especially those socialized to be agreeable, calm, or emotionally responsible for others, learn early that anger threatens connection. They become very skilled at managing other people's comfort, often at the expense of their own emotional clarity. When anger arises in these individuals, it immediately clashes with the internal rule that says, "Don't disrupt, don't escalate, don't make this worse." The result is emotional conflict, and the body resolves conflict through release. It's also important to understand that tears themselves are not just emotional. Crying activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps calm the body down after stress. In other words, crying is your nervous system trying to bring itself back into balance. When anger pushes you into high arousal and you can't discharge that energy through action or expression, tears help regulate the overload. This is why people often feel exhausted or calmer after crying, even if the situation itself hasn't changed. The problem isn't the crying. The problem is how people interpret it. When you cry while angry, others may stop taking your anger seriously. They may focus on comforting you instead of addressing the issue that made you angry in the first place. Over time, this teaches you that crying undermines your ability to be heard, which adds another layer of frustration and self-judgment. You may start to feel trapped in your own emotional responses, angry about being angry, and ashamed about how your body expresses it. This creates a loop. You anticipate that expressing anger will lead to tears. You try to control it. That control increases internal tension. The tension makes tears more likely, and when they come, you feel even less in control. Breaking this loop doesn't start with trying to stop crying. It starts with understanding what your anger is actually asking for. Anger is a boundary emotion. It signals that something is wrong, unfair, or misaligned. When you cry during anger, it often means the boundary feels important, but the pathway to enforce it feels blocked. The work then is not emotional suppression, but emotional translation, learning to recognize anger earlier when it's still quiet, naming it before it reaches overload, giving yourself permission to feel it without immediately judging it. It also helps to separate anger from aggression in your mind. Many people equate anger with harm, but anger doesn't require yelling, blaming, or attacking. It can be expressed calmly, clearly, and firmly. When your nervous system learns that anger can be expressed without destroying connection, it stops panicking. And when the panic drops, the tears often lessen naturally. There's another important reframe here. Crying when you're angry doesn't mean you're weak. It often means you have a highly responsive emotional system. You feel things fully. Your body reacts quickly. That sensitivity can be overwhelming, but it's also what allows for empathy, depth, and strong emotional awareness. The goal isn't to shut that system down. It's to learn how to work with it instead of against it. Over time, as you build emotional safety around your own anger, something shifts. You may still feel tears at the edge sometimes, but they no longer hijack the moment. You're able to stay present, to speak, to assert. And when tears do come, you no longer interpret them as failure. You see them as information, a sign that something matters deeply. One day, you'll notice that your anger feels clearer, less explosive, less overwhelming, not because you hardened yourself, but because you listened to what your emotions were trying to communicate all along. Crying was never the problem. It was your nervous system doing its best to cope in an environment where anger didn't always feel safe. When that environment changes internally or externally, your emotional responses change with it. Crying when you're angry doesn't mean you lack strength. It often means you've been carrying too much without enough space to release it. And learning to honor that truth is not weakness, it's emotional maturity.